Star Wars has always drawn inspiration from real history, condensing iconic imagery and a mishmash of revolutionary movements into a story of freedom fighters toppling an evil empire. But it was always framed in a space opera mold, portraying the rebels as paragons of good and the Empire as exemplars of evil. Andor not only makes it much grayer, but may reflect some important cultural shifts in our perception of the historical inspirations behind it. Of course, this is primarily Cassian Andor's story. He's not a revolutionary, he's just a poor guy trying to get by. But he's put in contact with Luthen, hires on for a heist, and by the end of Season 1, he's found a cause to devote himself to.
Kill me. Or take me in.
But by Season 2, that absolute devotion to the cause starts to wear thin. Stealing a prototype TIE fighter goes sideways, and instead of being met by competent rebel contacts as planned, he runs into the Star Wars equivalent of Antifa. Their enthusiasm far exceeds their abilities.
I don't hear you saying that.
It's confusing.
He's got to teach her.
Why would he do that?
If he doesn't, we'll kill him.
He can't teach her if he's dead.
Everything with you is negative.
The show pulls from several resistance and revolutionary movements and spins them all into its core themes. And while it very consciously pulls from mostly left-wing influences for the rebellion, Star Wars ends up being kind of a right-wing story despite itself, a restoration rather than a revolution. But regardless of alignment, left or right, rebel or imperial, the cause consumes those who serve it. And Andor, unlike the rest of Star Wars, shows us that revolutions tend to attract a high concentration of ruthless monsters and inept clowns. Luthen represents the monsters, while this band of bothers let us know that the clowns are going to play a role too. One way to look at Andor is as a story of an insurgency built around a triad of three linked characters: Cassian Andor, Dedra Meero, and Syril Karn. All of them have looked outward for meaning and purpose, all put their faith in something outside themselves, and all were used up and discarded by the object of that faith, though all in different ways. Let's begin with Dedra, an officer of the Imperial Security Bureau, an orphan raised by the state and now serving it.
My parents were criminals. They were arrested when I was 3. I was raised in an Imperial kinderblock.
She's not evil in the sense of, say, Krennic or Tarkin. She's merely using direct and sometimes violent means against those she perceives as threatening order and stability. Evil ends, yes, but in that 20th century banality of evil way. You could imagine her out walking her dog in the park just as easily as overseeing an interrogation. She's not some Sith cultist, she's just doing a job that she believes is necessary. But when she finally comes face to face with what that job entails, what she's really dedicated her life in service to, she struggles with it. She has that moment where she could say no.
I don't want the Gohrman project. I've thought it through all night, and I don't want it.
Humbling, isn't it? Both of us reminded of our place in the chain of command.
Not without consequences. She's well past being able to walk away by that point. But in that moment, she consents. After that, she can't rationalize that she's just pursuing terrorists or working for order and security. She acknowledges that she is an active and knowing participant in evil.
But let's not confuse the chain of command. I'm the trigger supervisor, you're the finger.
And having acknowledged, having consented, she leans into it. She had always found meaning and purpose in her service to the Empire, and that lets her ambition overpower any qualms she may have had.
We'll be out of here soon. We'll be back in Coruscant. We'll be together. We'll be rewarded.
This is a good point to pivot to Syril for a bit. When we first meet him, he's a cop. 2 officers have been killed, and he's going to catch the perp. The law requires it, and he will see justice done. Only the chief tells him to let it go.
But they were murdered.
No, they were killed in a fight. They're in a brothel, which we're not supposed to have, the expensive one, which they shouldn't be able to afford, drinking Rivnold, which we're not supposed to allow. Both of them supposedly on the job, which is a dismissible offence.
They were the oft-cited bad apples, and everyone is better off with them gone. But Syril is an idealist.
I don't understand.
I want you to conjure a suitable accident.
An officer of the law that ignores the law when it's inconvenient, well, that's not only failing at the job, but a moral failing. He digs into the case, obsessively, and just as the chief feared, It draws the eye of the Empire.
As of this morning, the Milana system is under permanent Imperial authority. Congratulations on that.
The feds, imps, show up and take charge, and everyone is worse off for his efforts. Syril is kicked off the force and goes back to live with his mom in disgrace.
Is that how you've been presenting yourself to the world? That would explain a great deal.
At his new job at the Bureau of Standards, he uses his data access to continue working on the case. Through that, he meets Dedra and becomes attached in the same kind of obsessive way.
Have you been waiting out here?
Yes. I'd never lie to you.
By the start of Season 2, they're a couple, and through the next several episodes, we see Syril transferring the loyalty he once had for law and order to her, almost as a personification of those ideals. And these two, Syril and Dedra, in a sort of shared orbit, hit the pivotal moments of their arc during the Gohrman operation. Dedra is there to stir up a reckless response from the local rebels.
You need Gohrman rebels you can depend on to do the wrong thing.
While Syril believes he's just there as an administrator, but in reality he's being used by the Empire through Dedra to set up violent rebel activity.
Syril must never know what this is all really about.
I remind myself constantly, sir.
He's the first to really feel that betrayal, to be discarded by the thing he placed his faith in. And the truth shatters him. I don't think anyone missed it, but it's important enough to point out that the ride on Gohrman had not only months of preparation and stoking anger and deliberate leaks of information, but also contingencies in place to make sure it erupted as desired. Lure them into the square, let them gather and fester in their discontent, threaten them with displays of force. Sending the Imperial troops into the crowd, cut off in a single line, is obvious bait. Ideally, from the Imperial perspective, the crowd would attack and justify the use of force to suppress them. But the crowd didn't attack. An extra nudge was needed to spark the desired result.
Supervisor Miro.
Proceed.
They need a riot, and one way or another, they're going to make sure they get one. Recent history is full of mass demonstrations that have the superficial appearance of spontaneity, but on a closer examination are revealed as deliberately crafted policy tools. The Gohrman uprising isn't a grassroots expression of the will of the people, it's a weaponization of their discontent by the very powers that are causing them to be discontented. Most of the people there on the ground are sincere, but they were steered into that specific action. They got played for someone else's agenda. We are the Gohr indeed. The resulting mayhem allows the Empire to use a heavier hand and vilify other opposition to their policies by equating them with those terrorists on Gohrman. And of course, all three pieces of our triad are present. The completely disconnected and rudderless Syril literally standing in the middle of a gunfight, looking for something to run to, locks on to Cassian Andor. Just as Dedra had become his personification of what was right in the world, Cassian was his incarnation of everything wrong in it, the man who ruined his life.
Who are you?
But alas, Syril's journey is over. So backing up to Cassian, he's initially sent to Gohrman to sniff out the local resistance group, see if they're worth working with. He is not impressed.
The people you have following me, they're just drawing attention. Send them home.
But more than that, he's no longer fully committed himself.
I'm done after this.
And Luthen knows this. He's messing with him a bit.
He waits for me to leave. He comes when you're alone.
He sends someone else to Gohrman to watch him.
2 days in, you barely looked around.
How do you know what I did?
Someone else to coordinate with the local resistance.
Exactly. In a place where they know nothing about fighting.
And Cassian is right. The Gohrman front is a bunch of amateurs that have no idea what they're doing.
Don't talk. Don't think. Do as you are told. If you can't manage that, you don't belong here.
Not as bad as Chaz Patrol from the first act, but they're in way over their heads and they're being used by both sides. An excuse for the Empire and a sacrifice for the rebellion.
If it goes up in flames,
it will burn. Very brightly.
This isn't freedom versus tyranny. This rebellion isn't fighting to free the people, but to topple the Empire. There's overlap, but they're vastly different things. The first half of Season 2 is partly Cassian coming to fully understand the implications of that. In a previous Andor video, I said this.
You can stand to see the Imperial flag reign across the galaxy.
It's not a problem if you don't look up.
It's played as part of Jyn Erso's awakening to the necessity of standing against evil. She needs to stop drifting through life, pick a side, and fight for justice. But I think we need to ask ourselves if maybe she had a healthier outlook than the Zealots. It's a point that Season 2 makes even stronger. The Empire is evil, but the Rebellion, as depicted here, is a different kind of evil. The lesser evil by most metrics, but a far sight from good. In part because they both foster a moral certainty in their defenders, personified by Dedra and most of the lesser ISB flunkies on the Imperial side, and on the Rebel side with Luthen, Clea, Vel, Cinta. It's that moral certainty, that conviction that this thing is so evil that I must stop it at anything it takes is justified, that is just as corrupting, destructive, and all-consuming as the dark side thirst for power. It's why the Rebels and the Imperials alike can justify killing so many in the name of their cause, even sacrificing their own. It feeds self-righteous actions, atrocities, rationalization that the most immoral acts are noble and necessary. This horrific thing that I've done was necessary for the cause.
For the greater good.
Call it what you will.
But it's all an excuse, a way to avoid responsibility for one's actions. And Cassian never fully embraces that. He goes to Gohrman believing that he's there to realistically assess the local resistance group's capabilities, not as a sacrificial pawn or an atrocity to rally around, but as allies, real people who live or die depending on how they conduct their operations. But that's not the mission. So Vel and Cinta are sent instead, true believers who will follow orders and not ask questions. They're not heroes, they're kinda psychos, and it's a major break from everything that Star Wars has been before. Personally, I really like this show, but I absolutely understand why some Star Wars fans don't. It's off-brand in a lot of ways. The Rebels have been transformed from swashbuckling Flash Gordon types into space Bolsheviks. The Empire is no longer the dark side mystical evil of mythology or boilerplate space Nazis, but the bureaucratized evil of the modern era. Cassian recognizes some of this. It's part of why he wants out.
I'm done. I'm not doing it anymore. I've done what I can.
But of course, it's not that simple. Recall Season 1 when Vel and Cinta were sent to find him and kill him, tie up a loose end.
We have a loose end. Cassian the Andor, who you know as Clem. You need to find him.
Find him?
We can't have him walking around with Luthen in his head.
He knew too much then, he's in way too deep now. They'll never let him go. But he's also not really one of them, because the rebellion we see here is its own cesspool of power plays and fiefdoms. There are the key players, the power brokers. Luthen is the initial driving force, the one who brought them all together and has all the contacts. Old establishment figures like Mon Mothma and Bail Organa, who bring both financial support and, more importantly, a sense of legitimacy and continuity. And these two that seem like they just need a place to hide out and try to veto any actual insurgent activity.
It sounds like a paranoid fantasy.
Luthen Rail died for this.
And how has that been verified?
Are you serious?
Saw Gerrera is always on the fringe, mostly because he's the most honest and trustworthy of the lot, despite being a nutjob.
You think I'm crazy? Yes, I am.
But despite joining the rebellion and risking his life for years in its service, Cassian is still treated like a merc.
I'm here for the money.
Perhaps best illustrated by his mission to extract Mon Mothma from the Senate building under the noses of the ISB. A mission he accomplishes only to be told that he needs to let others take credit for it.
We are not going to log this in, any of this. That's the plan. Gold Squadron will deliver the Senate at Yavin.
A few little lies to keep the machine moving along smoothly. Rebel Alliance Incorporated has to keep everyone on the board happy. Oh, by the way, Cass, we've got another high-risk, thankless mission for you. A mission that kicks off the events of Rogue One and eventually his death. Discarded and used up. Bringing us back to Dedra, years spent serving the Empire, pouring through bits of data about rebel activity, trying to tease out the patterns and get a step ahead of them. Which of course brought her into some highly sensitive information.
Say it. Say the word.
Death Star.
It's hard to catch a spy without getting some inkling of what they're spying on in the process. But knowing things can be very dangerous in a paranoid authoritarian regime. A data trail proving you know those things, well, that's completely damning. And so, after all her service, after facilitating key aspects of the Death Star project, she ends up dumped into the Narkina prison, where she can serve in another capacity. On a macro level, the Empire unquestionably kills more people and destroys more lives. But on an individual level, throwing in with any of them is a highly dubious undertaking, one where your friends are as big a danger as the enemy, and compromising any sense of moral integrity is pretty much a requirement.
So then what? Let it continue?
I'm not saying do nothing, just let evil have its way. I'm not even, as a rule, condemning political violence in Minecraft. What I'm saying is that whether you're an Imperial enforcing the laws and trying to protect the people and maintain order, or a freedom fighter striking a blow against oppression, you're doing it, personally, and you bear personal responsibility for your actions in service to that cause. This trooper is making up reasons to arrest people so they can be sent to a labor camp. Luthen kills a bunch of bystanders on Naboo. They're both a danger, both enemies to decent people just trying to live their lives. Both are creating enemies every day, giving people legitimate reasons to hate them and the cause they represent. And they're both personally responsible for their actions. That's what almost broke Dedra and Gohrman. It did break Syril. Cassian was eased into it more. He adapted better because it wasn't a sudden moment of realization, but rather a years-long process. A line from Rogue One sums it up well.
Everything I did for the rebellion. And every time I walked away from something I wanted to forget, I told myself it was for a cause that I believed in. A cause that was worth it.
These are not the words of a zealot. This is a man who takes responsibility for what he's done, who's weighed it against what he believes is necessary and accepts the cost. He doesn't kill lightly, he feels it and he carries it. He's had to come to terms with it over a long time, but like Syril and Dedra, he ends up in the service of monsters. Monsters that consume his entire life. I think it's important to look at the mix of influences here. Star Wars draws very strongly on historical events, but it's never straight one-for-one allegory. When George Lucas said,
"When I did it, they were Viet Cong,"
he wasn't saying that the rebels are stand-ins for the Viet Cong.
or a colonial, we're fighting the largest empire in the world.
Right.
And we're just a bunch of hayseeds in coonskin hats that don't know nothing.
Or that the rebellion was a direct allegory of the American Revolution. It's informed by those things, just as Gohrman is heavily French-coded, but there will be no liberation. No new republic for them. An aside, for decades, Star Wars fans have been using BBY and ABY as a way of taking all the expansive content of the Star Wars universe and putting it in some kind of a timeline centered around the original Star Wars movie. But the Battle of Yavin in-world is one of the pivotal moments in the history of the New Republic. Andor is the first canon on-screen project to use that dating system, suggesting that it may actually be in use by the New Republic, which is a cause for some concern and also some story possibilities. Using an event central to the new regime as a year zero is the kind of thing that comes out of seriously unbalanced revolutions.
Indoctrination by the Empire is challenging to overcome.
The French Revolution being the obvious example, though Cambodia's Khmer Rouge had their own take on it. One of these days, I half expect to see a story of the New Republic that plays with some French Revolution influences and the reign of terror of their own Jacobin equivalents, seeing imperial sympathizers around every corner and denouncing each other until their own Robespierre is dealt with one way or another. That would be a wild ride, but this show leans into a different revolutionary mess. Andor throws a heavy dose of Bolshevism into the mix. Damien Walter has already done a great video on that, so I'm not going to repeat all those points. Go, check that one out if you haven't already. The key point here is that there are clear revolutionary vanguard, bourgeois fellow traveler, and proletarian elements in the rebellion, both in terms of its class structure and the ruthlessness of the vanguard. Luthen, Lenin, it's not real subtle. But it doesn't erase those other pieces. They're Bolsheviks, American revolutionaries, the French resistance, all mashed together. We can even compare them to right-wing militia movements. They are explicitly political paramilitary forces going on about restoring the Republic, after all. It's a representation of the mechanism of revolution without getting too mired in the ideology. Their only platform is wanting the Empire gone. The Empire has been subjected to a similar remix. They've always had the obvious space Nazi thing going, but they've never been literal one-for-one Nazis. They can just as easily be compared to America as a hegemonic power solving problems through force, either overt or through carefully crafted color revolutions here and there. Andor leans heavily into the British aspects. The entire Gohrman operation can be taken as a colonial resource grab. What the Empire needs, it will find a way to extract from its subject populations. Even the costumes reflect this aspect to some extent. Fewer faceless stormtroopers, more regular army. The crisp uniforms of the original trilogy are frequently replaced by field uniforms on the soldiers. More subdued, more BDU style, toning it down a little. The Imperial officers in this series frequently wear trench coats in a cut that looks more modern British or American than World War II German, again bringing it back a bit from the old vibe. I don't want to read too much into this, probably will though, but if Star Wars has always been a sort of cultural filter, then I think there's something immensely encouraging about Andor. It's one of the many signs that we're finally getting over World War II. Just making the villains look like Nazis isn't enough anymore. It's too far removed, the symbolism too overused. It's only good for hyperbole and unintentional comedy anymore. That influence is certainly not being removed, it's just sinking down to the same level as the other influences instead of towering above them. The farce of the First Order was hopefully the last dying gurgle of that. Now it's become less cartoonish. For example, Krennic's Gohrman meeting, which has subdued parallels with the Wannsee Conference rather than outlandish supervillain ranting. Notably, they're not discussing the details of genocide for its own sake. The Empire isn't fixated on exterminating the Gore. They just want what's under the ground that these people are living on.
The Galactic extraction, I'm assuming it's an invasive process.
It would present stark challenges to the local population.
Meaning what?
The extent of our withdrawal may render the planet unstable.
They know they can't just push them aside without public backlash. They need to engineer public opinion, make them all into terrorists to justify attacking them for a resource grab. It's less Heydrich and Eichmann and more Bush and Blair. That said, one of the most striking visual elements of this scene is that window and the view of the mountains beyond, which strongly invokes the view from Hitler's office in the Berghof. That World War II influence is still there, it's just part of the chorus now instead of trying to solo. The Imperials are amoral technocrats rather than a caricature of a long-vanquished boogeyman. It's still there, but blended more evenly with the other influences, retaining some of the style without the ideological substance, which is the same thing that the show does by bringing the Bolshevik element into the rebellion. Luthen is less a character and more a force in this story, the thing that the rebellion coalesces around, the axis, you might say. But he doesn't display much ideology beyond that. He's not the vanguard of some kind of Marxian reordering of galactic society, he's just trying to tear down the Empire. Even Nemec's manifesto is anti-imperial rather than pro-anything else beyond maybe a sort of de facto anarchism.
Freedom is a pure idea. It occurs spontaneously and without instruction. Random acts of insurrection are occurring constantly throughout the galaxy.
So I wonder if we're seeing the Cold War mythology, both sides of it, starting to evaporate and leave behind a sort of sedimentary truth. The communist movements that Luthen's rebellion is modeled on often were fighting against oppressive authoritarian regimes, and Andor runs with that, deeply infusing it into Luthen's rebel faction. but it also doesn't portray them in a positive light. I mean, these people are bastards.
I'm not sure what you're saying.
How nice for you.
It's neither Marxist cheerleading nor Cold War red baiting. It's just shown people determined to tear down a brutal and oppressive system, being as devious and murderous as they need to accomplish that goal. Revolution is a dirty business. And it's not Luthen's revolution that succeeds in the end, but the reactionaries. The rebellion of Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, the return of the Republic. Luthen does get his last stand. When he has no avenue of escape, he tries to kill himself rather than be captured and forced to divulge information that could cripple the rebellion. But the Empire stops him. It's the rebels that have to kill him. He's become a liability, not so much a revolution as a movement, one that has run its course and now needs to be silenced. And so, like Cassian, Dedra, and Syril, Luthen is used up and discarded. Just as we've used up the myths of the 20th century in many ways. We know that ultimately the rebellion isn't a revolution, but a restoration. New Republic, same old problems. Sometimes going back is the right thing to do, but usually we can't. Not really. The New Republic can't escape the Empire. Things change during that time. Just like America today can't go back to the 1950s, even if everybody wanted to. I definitely understand why not all Star Wars fans like Andor, but it does mark a departure from the kind of rehashing the same old story over and over with ever-decreasing fidelity that has been Star Wars in recent years. I don't think it's going to change the course of the franchise right away, but I do think that when, say, 50 years from now, someone analyzes the media from our time, Andor is going to stick out in part for the reasons I've outlined here.
Many Bothans died to bring us this information.
Now I wonder who really got that information and why the Bothans are being given credit for it.